If you fish out of a drift boat, it is by far the best way to catch more fish and to catch bigger fish. And I'll explain why that is and why you don't want to spend your time waiting if you can get in a drift boat and float. And this took me way too long to figure out in my fly fishing career of why I need to find a friend with a drift boat or hire a guide or just learn how to row or just invest in a drift boat and do it myself, is because when you're covering more water, you're just simply going to catch more fish. That is the biggest reason why fishing out of a drift boat is by far the better option than just going on your own and just waiting. When you're waiting, you can really target one area. If you know there's a fish in that run or that pocket or that back eddy, you can target that fish in a small river that's a tailwater river that you cannot float. I can understand that waiting is the only thing that is very effective, but if you can get in a drift boat and it's a big, long Montana river, you are going to catch more fish because the drift boat, you can cover more water. It's more forgiving because when you're going down the river, one of the biggest things is getting a drag-free drift. And if you're not a very experienced fly fisherman and you don't know how to do that, your guide is going to do that for you. Everything is done for you in a drift boat. The guides, especially if they have a lot of experience and they're not like this is their first time rowing in a boat, those guys can actually maneuver the boat so that you don't have to do anything. So if you're not very advanced or you're not very good at casting, or you have a dry dropper setup and you've got it and you can't cast very well, they're going to position the boat and straighten that line out for you so that you can get a good long drag-free drift. And a drag-free drift is absolutely essential to catching fish. When you're waiting, you're very, very limited because your line is starting at a 45-degree angle up and then going down to 45 degrees. You're going to get drag within that, let's say 25, 30 foot stretch. You're going to get some drag in there. That is guaranteed going to happen no matter what you do. At some point it's going to drag. So the amount of water that you can fish is limited. When you're on a boat, some of these runs that we're going through, that those guides actually know where those runs are. And that's another key about hiring a guide, is that they know exactly where to go and where those fish are historically. And it's a huge advantage versus just trying to figure it out yourself. But those guides can go through a run and they can get your drag perfect. And the better fisherman, of course, you are, the easier it is going to be on the guide. But they can get that line stretched out so you don't have a whole bunch of slack in there. And they'll tell you to mend it. They'll tell you when to mend it, how to mend it. If you're mending wrong, they'll tell you. And you can get a drift that goes for like 80 feet. So 80 feet versus 25 feet on the bank is going to give you a much better chance to catch fish because you're going to get that covering more water longer. The other thing with a drift boat is these guides will actually row up. You'll catch a couple of fish, they'll row up, you're gonna catch a couple of fish. They'll fish that out until the fish just don't wanna bite anymore. Then they're gonna move on to the next run or the next hole, and they're gonna concentrate their time on the best water, and they're gonna row fast through the water that is ineffective or ineffective at holding fish, or historically doesn't hold any fish. Now, when you learn that most water when you're fishing doesn't actually hold fish, especially trout fishing, let's say trout fishing in Montana, for example, when most of the water doesn't actually hold trout, the more water you can efficiently fish, the better you're gonna be. And when you're waiting, you can only cover so many miles, but when you're floating, you can cover the other side of the river. And that's a big disadvantage with waiting, is that you may have shallow, kind of slow moving water on your one side, it's ripping in the middle, and the other side, you cannot fish it very well from the side that you're on. So for example, if you're on the bank and you're fly fishing on the other side, you're gonna get a 5 foot, maybe 6 foot drift, and then you're gonna get drag. No matter what you do, how good you are, it's just very, very limiting. So hitting the other side of the bank is basically unfished. Now, if you can walk to the other side of the bank, it's gonna be gold and you're gonna catch all those big fish that other people can't cast to. But if you're in a drift boat, you don't have to worry about that because the guide is gonna tell you fish right, fish left. You're just, the volume of water you're fishing compared to waiting is so exponentially huge that you're gonna be covering more water and you're gonna be catching those bigger fish. In my experience, the bigger fish, when you're dry fly fishing or you're nymph fishing, doesn't matter how you're fishing, you're just simply catching more fish because you're covering more water in areas that aren't getting pounded. And the fishing pressure, this is just my opinion. Don't get mad at me if you've had a situation that is outside of this opinion, but my opinion is that the big fish sit in water that doesn't get fished much. Those fish may be migratory coming out of a lake, and fishing out of a drift boat is just the best way to target those. I remember fishing on the Missouri River, we hooked into a 25-inch brown trout. Legitimate, we saw it in the net, and then I didn't get it quite on video because it flopped out of the net and spit out the fly, but legitimate 25-inch brown trout. And the only reason we caught that is because we were fishing out of a drift boat. There is no chance that I could have targeted that fish because one, I would have been waiting. by myself without a guide. Number two, even if I had a drift boat, those guides just have things dialed in and have knowledge that you don't know. So hiring a guide, even aside from hiring a guide, having a drift boat is essential. We never would have hooked that fish, never even known that that fish existed in our lives had we just been fishing the bank. There's no way that could have happened because that fish was just right in the middle of the water, and fishing in water, honestly, that wasn't even that productive. But the guy knew that, hey, we're just gonna try this out with this line, and I was fishing behind, trying to film a little bit of my friend. Long story short, there's no way I could have done that waiting versus being in a drift boat. Another advantage of a drift boat is that a drift boat can actually pull over and you can get out and wade. We do this all the time in Montana. The guides will fish out a hole and there will be areas that are maybe there's a side channel that we want to actually just walk and wade up a little bit. The guides generally don't like doing that because it can cover more volume of water the more they're in the boat. But sometimes you'll get guides where you're like, hey, I see a fish rising up in that back channel. Can we fish it? Sometimes they'll say no, sometimes they'll say yes, but hey, try this dry fly out, give it a couple of casts and get back to the boat. So you can also take that boat and you can get into side channels that nobody else can get into. I remember years ago on the Missouri River, there was a back channel that I love to fish and you can only get there by boat. You cannot access it any other way, but I would take my drift boat and I would anchor up and I would walk back in that back channel and you'd see big brown trout eating PMDs all day long in the summer. And I just had a heyday because most people just float right by there. But it also gives you the option, fishing out of a drift boat, to actually fish back channels that never see people. And you can walk up, but you can spend half of the day walking up in there and fish water that has never ever been fished so far in that season. So that's a huge advantage and something that I just love doing out of a drift boat. And honestly, some of those big fish are back in those channels. Maybe they're going up there to spawn. Maybe they're just going up there to get into some cool spring water because it's really, really hot. A lot of times this hot weather is just pushing this fish in the deep back channels that have springs that come into them. So sometimes the biggest fish that I found in my experience, and I'm not a fly fishing guide, there's guys that can explain this a lot better than me and that have way more experience, but just in my limited experience of fishing with guides in Montana, the back channels are excellent for fishing and you can only get there via drift boat. Another reason fishing in drift boat is just such a huge advantage is that you're up 7 feet in the water. I'm 6'2.5", and I actually get up almost 6.5 feet, depending on how high your drift boat is. If you're standing up, you're up there in elevation, looking down on those fish. You have to have polarized glasses, but you can see fish so much easier. If you're the one standing up in front of the boat, you have your guide looking down half of a mile, quarter mile down the river, looking for rises. You can just see what's up ahead so much farther than if you're sitting down low. Like when you're wading, you're not nearly as tall as you are in a drift boat, and you can see so much better. You can see fish that you couldn't really see from a bank. When you're fishing from a bank also, you have limited profiles, so you're only seeing like one type of water. When you're seeing different types of water changing, you go around a bend, there's a big bank, you're throwing the hopper in there, you have the guide spotting out for you, the guy in the back helping find water and feeding fish, especially when you're fishing dry flies. It's just so much more effective because you can row past all the water that's not good, whereas normally you'd have to wade in there. So that's why I like fishing out of a drift boat. Another piece that you'll hear a lot in these videos that I talk about is that you want to fish water that other people don't fish. You can't do that by wading unless you put on the miles. Don't fish access points or places that are easy for people to fish. The water may look perfect, but a lot of times there's no fish or there's just little tiny fish in there because they get caught so much and the big ones just aren't in there, or those fish don't grow up to be big because they're little because people just keep harassing them and catching them, and there's a higher mortality rate of a lot of those fish. So getting to water that other people can't fish, obviously a drift boat's gonna be a much better option. One time I took a raft trip into water that other people couldn't fish out of a hard drift boat. So I was fishing by myself because my buddies canceled, and the guides were like, hey, that's fantastic. We can actually fish some unfished water that really doesn't get fished a lot. And so this was in Montana, and I won't name the name of this river because I don't want it to be blown out for these guides, but it's essentially a river that nobody fishes or that gets very, very little fishing pressure. We basically put a raft way high up in this river and we floated down. The guides knew the put in and take out, so they had a specific knowledge. Just don't go out and try to do this on your own. I wouldn't recommend it. There's diversion dams and all sorts of dangerous things in the water that you need to be careful. It could be life threatening for you. So honestly, go with a guide that has a lot of experience that has done this. But essentially, we went to an area and I had a raft instead of a hard drift boat that most people are used to using. And we caught so many fish. I had 90 to 100 eats on a dry fly. We were just catching fish all day long. It was so much fun, and it's because we were fishing water that other people couldn't even bring a hard drift boat down. So that's another situation that just proves my point that you can't walk and wade that water. I guess you could just kind of go up there. There's some access regulations there that walking and wading, it's just not feasible. And there's no way that you could get 100 dry fly eats throughout the day. Now, I didn't land all those fish. I didn't land 100 fish, but I did get 100 fish to come up and eat my dry fly. Super exciting dry fly fishing. And if you want to know the name of the guide service, I'm happy to share that. These guys are excellent. They're out of Southwest Montana. And I would love for you guys to go hook up with that guide service and go with them and experience this for yourself. But I wouldn't have got that had I been on the bank. There is no way. So that's all I have for this video. So that's all I have for this video. Hopefully by the end of this, you can learn that fishing out of a drift boat is a much better way to catch fish. Quantity of fish, quality of fish, it's just hands down so much better. Hopefully you learned a lot from this. Comment down below if you agree. Maybe you disagree with me. Maybe you just hammer a whole bunch of big 20-inch brown trout because you know exactly where to walk and wade. If you can float it, I think it's better, but let me know what your opinion is on this. Maybe you disagree with me. Maybe you agree 100% and you have an experience you want to share on here that other people can learn from, because that's what these videos are about, teaching people to fly fish, getting people to catch more fish. So hopefully you learned a lot about fly fishing out of a drift boat versus wading. And if you like these videos, give me a subscribe so I can make more of them, so other people can see more of them. Thanks for watching.